glad you're with us wherever you are. If you're joining us on the airwaves here in Santa Barbara, California at TVSB, we welcome you. If you're finding us at goodlifetelevision.org, we're glad you're with us as well. You can listen to lots of long-form interviews at that site, as well as what we call power clips. You can follow us on the social media platforms at Good Life TV, and you can also find us at our new podcast, which is Good Life Conversations. A lot of people like to listen to podcasts when they're working out or driving or whatever, so feel free to find us at Good Life Conversations. It's on all the podcast platforms. So we're grateful for you. We're always here to bring light and to honor, to uplift, to encourage, to empower, and that's one of the things we're going to be doing today. So welcome. I'm so glad to have my guests and good friends, Douglas and Spencer Doman, are with me. Welcome.
Howdy.
We're here to talk about this book. We've known these gentlemen for a long time, about 18 years, and they've written a couple of new books. One of them is called The Doman Method, and one of them is called Answering Autism. So this is the Doman Method plan for autism, ADD, and neurodevelopmental delays. So kids that are in that category, people that are in that category of autism, ADD, or any kind of neurodevelopmental delay, this is a great resource. We recommend it to you. If you know of a parent who's dealing with a kid in that situation and they want to know what they can do to help their child, we'd really recommend this book. How did you decide to write this?
Well, we live in an age where 1 in 14 kids is diagnosed with some kind of developmental disability, and the most common is autism. And I think I heard recently, in the state of New Jersey, for example, which is very close to us, I think it's like 1 in 30 kids now is being diagnosed with autism.
Wow.
So the number of children who are affected by this diagnosis are many, and the symptoms that come with it, whether it's debilitating speech problems, some kids are completely nonverbal. They could have physical problems, coordination issues, social difficulties, terrible hypersensitivity to sounds right, that are painful to them. And so these children have very real, difficult lives. And so this book was all about giving parents a plan to help address that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you hear about kind of the autism epidemic, or that it's a major situation that parents are facing. So you're saying, like in that study, 1 in 30. I mean, we're somewhere on the spectrum, or
right? Yeah,
that's incredible. Yeah. So a parent, what happens? Let's take it this way. Somebody who's introduced to you guys, and DomanInternational.org is the website, DomanInternational.org. So a parent with an autistic child comes to you. What happens first? What do you do?
Well, I mean, Dean, that we see every kind of special needs child there is. I mean, we see children who are called cerebral palsy. We see children who are called epileptic, or Down syndrome, or any kind of genetic disorder. So we see every kind of special needs child there is. And of course, my father, starting 60 years ago, looked at cerebral palsy, autism, all of these labels that are placed on children. And he understood that they are not true medical diagnoses. They are symptoms of brain injury.
Right.
Cerebral palsy is a symptom of brain injury. Mental retardation, a term that my father fought 60 years ago. And it was only, 20, 25 years ago that the government stopped using the term mental retardation, which is, totally offensive and untrue, if that's not bad enough. So we aren't thrilled with the term autism as well. We use that so that parents whose kids have been labeled autistic know that they can have help.
Right.
And in fact, they're not hopeless, but they have incredible potential. We've seen thousands and thousands of children who came to us diagnosed. When we do a full neurological evaluation and a full medical exam, we determined that these children have neurological problems. The neurological problem means the problem is in the brain. And so with cerebral palsy, with autism, with trisomy 21, the problem is in the brain. And of course, there is a lot that we can do in terms of growing and developing the brain.
So that's fascinating. So a term like autism, the way I see this is, if you are diagnosed with a term like autism, it's almost like a disease you caught. I have a disease called autism, and therefore I'm stuck, right? Versus what you're saying, which is these are all just names, descriptions of my brain was injured somehow. So what you guys are doing is saying, here's where the brain injury is, or here's what and here's how we treat it. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly right. And so it's basically a label that is used for a collection of symptoms, right? So like I said, most children deal with speech issues, social difficulties, sensory problems. And the real problem with it, some people might say, well, why even talk about, the problems of labels? Well, the first thing is that it's used often to limit kids, right? So the doctor will tell parents, your child has autism, and because
that's
of that,
not a compliment. The parents don't think, oh, that's a good thing.
Right.
And that means your child will never do this, and this, right? So it comes with a ceiling. The parents are given a ceiling for the child's development, and then parents are also fed a kind of a hopelessness. There's nothing that can really be done about this, right. And both of those, we'll see what happens. Wait and see, yeah. Right? In many ways, that's the most positive thing many parents will be told. Other parents are given a lot more despair than that, and so yeah, this is a very anti-despair book. It's right. About here are the step-by-step, practical things you can do at home to help your kids with all of those issues that I just listed.
The program in the book, of course, it talks about the whole background behind the Doman method. The brain grows by use, neuroplasticity. The whole foundation is there in terms of how brain growth and development is possible. But there's a huge amount of how to do in that book. And so a child who is considered mildly autistic, that program we've worked out over 60 years. So there's a physical program, there's a cognitive program, there's a sensory integration program, there's a nutrition program, there's a sleep program, there's a social program. It's all there. And some children, if parents just follow what it says in the book, that kid has a good chance of making it and getting well, and then going to school, not as to a special ed class, but going to school with children the same age, regular schools, regular kids, and competing successfully with their peers, and not as the lowest member of the class, but when we send kids to school, we deliberately do it to make sure that they're going to be in the top of the class,
right.
And win. Success creates success. Failure creates failure. We've
right.
got to create success so the children can win, and they have the self-esteem, to know they can win as well.
Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just thought of something. So, for most parents, what happens in their path, is if they have a child with autism or ADD or neurodevelopmental delay, they'll, start with reading the book, they'll start implementing the things at home and, start seeing results. And then after that, the next step is the Doman method course, right, which is our online course where we teach parents about our program. But I got a really wonderful message at the end of last year where a mom actually contacted us and said, I got the book, my child was dealing with speech issues and, social difficulties. And so I've implemented the program. He's doing great now. His speech is, like any average child. He's doing great in school. Just wanted to let you know, so she didn't even have to take that next step,
right.
Because she got everything she needed in the book.
Wow.
And I was a little disappointed I didn't get to meet the child,
right.
But it was a beautiful thing to know that the book did its job,
Right, yes. Yeah, and ADD, talk about ADD, because I think a lot of parents would be confused. Again, You know, when I hear dyslexia or I hear ADD or some of these terms, it's kind of like a stamp on your forehead, like, you know, here's what I am.
Yeah.
But you don't see it that way. Talk about ADD in terms of how you can help.
Right. So ADD stands for attention deficit disorder, and then there's a similar diagnosis, which is ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And similar to autism, it's used for children that have specific symptoms, you know, mostly focus and concentration issues. And, you know, the brain is the command center of the body, right? So everything we can basically do as humans, we do because of our brains. And so and that includes being able to focus in class and, you know, pay attention for long periods of time and take in information as our teacher teaches us. So kids who have difficulty with those things are often labeled with ADD. And unfortunately, the approach that's taken is usually drug therapy, right? It's like, let's give kids medications and that will fix the problem. And it rarely does, and the medications often come with really strong side effects, sometimes that are even worse than the original problem that the kid had. And so this is a drug-free approach,
Yeah.
and many of the kids actually on our program can be, with the help of course, with a physician, can be weaned off medication because they see such good gains from the program itself.
Wow. And so you have seen ADD kids, you give them a program that they do where that is corrected. Absolutely.
Yeah, and sometimes parents will even say that, you know, their child gets a diagnosis, could be autism or ADD, and then the kid, you know, graduates from our program. When we say graduates, it means that the staff and the parents agree that this child is ready to succeed in life with their peers at school, not in a special needs classroom, normal classroom. And when the parents get to school, you know, they'll say something like to the school administrator or to the teacher, you know, oh, I just want to let you know he was diagnosed with ADD or autism. And they're not even believed. You know, the teacher's like, yeah, okay, yeah. Because the kid looks like all the other kids, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Unfortunately, the opposite also happens, is that the child is labeled in the system autistic, and we send the kid off to school. Physically, he's above average. You know, he's a great runner. He breakates, or he's, you know, a great swimmer or a biker or whatever. And then he's intellectually above age level, but he still has the label because the system says he's autistic,
Right.
even though he isn't anymore.
Right.
You have to be ex-autistic.
Right. That's amazing. Neurodevelopmental delays. So this is, you always talk about how moms know. You know, if something's, the mom is the first one to know something's not right, something's missing here, or there's a problem. And oftentimes when they go to the doctor says everything's fine, just we'll see what happens. But what you guys are saying is if you pay close attention to what those moms say, because oftentimes they are the ones who get it first. Talk about that, and then the delay. You know, kids that are having delays, how you can help them.
Yeah, and also it can be grandmothers too. I mean, because if it's the first child, mom doesn't have any experience to compare to, but grandmother has experience, and she'll be the first one to say, I'm worried about this, and then her daughter starts to look as well, and then, you know, realize we need to do something.
We've heard a very similar story over and over again where, you know, mom goes to her pediatrician and says, you know, doctor, you know, maybe she has a 1-year-old, and she says, you know, doctor, I'm really concerned about my child's development. And the doctor will say something like, you know, all kids develop differently, you know, come back in 6 months, you know. So mom comes back 6 months later and says, you know, doctor, there's something really wrong here, you know. And the doctor will say, you know, all mothers think that, you know, like, and that's not a compliment, that's an insult, right? And then maybe 6 months later, she comes back to the doctor and says, you know, doctor, there's something wrong with my kid, and if you're not going to help me with it, I'll find someone who can.
Right.
And that's the day the doctor says, okay, this kid has autism,
Right,
you know.
right.
So mom's been saying it for 1.5 years, you know, and trying to convince everyone around her. while everyone tells her she's crazy. So, yeah, mom's intuition is nearly always right.
Yeah.
And about the developmental delays, when parents sense that something's not right in their child's development, I think it's very important that there's a lot of times in life where patience is a good thing, but I think, if you suspect your child has a delay, don't be too patient, you know, and so, hopefully this book can help them with
The earlier you intervene, the better.
Right.
Yes,
Absolutely.
for sure.
Let's talk about speech. And again, just I think the common thought process would be my kid has a speech impediment, whatever. You'd think that maybe it's something wrong with their mouth or something but it's the brain. How do you treat that? I mean, and what does that look like for somebody who's watching this that goes, how does that work?
Yeah. So the way we treat it is actually through an integrative approach, meaning, for most parents, when they have a child with a speech problem, they're told, you go to a speech therapist, right? And the speech therapist, very well-meaning person, will usually have the kid go through a bunch of different activities. And very often, unfortunately, the kid won't have good results from that. And it's because they're not actually treating the root cause of the problem, which is in the brain. They're trying to address a symptom. And you can't fix a disease by, focusing on the symptoms. It would be like if you went to the doctor and you went, doctor, I have terrible chest pains and I can't feel my left arm and I'm feeling nauseous, and the doctor said, oh, I'll give you, a muscle relaxer for your chest and I'll, massage your left arm until you feel it better. Like we all know that person's having a heart attack, right? And a real doctor who's good is going to address that root cause. Right. And then when he fixes the heart, the rest of the body will be fine, you know? Right. But unfortunately, with kids with special needs, the world tries to treat all the symptoms, right? Right. So, interesting thing about speech is when you take that integrative approach, when you focus on the child's nutrition, right? When you actually surprisingly teach the child to read, very often helps with speech, because when we read, actually the language areas of our brain are activated. And so for
the human cortex is responsible for language, and it's responsible for reading as well. So you're growing the visual and auditory pathway when you're teaching a child how to read, and of course we get that information out of the brain through language and also manual competence and being able to write.
Yeah, I talk about one child in the book who couldn't speak before the program. And the mom started the reading program, and his language just exploded. And the way the mom described it is, she said, the reading program gave Leo his voice. By seeing language in written form, that was the best way for his brain to be able to, give the output part of language, which is speech.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the autistic kid who is just behaviorally off the chart. We had a friend in Texas who, the kid would just undress and run into the neighbor's yard. Just, they had to literally lock this. Behavior problems related to autism. How does that work with what you guys do? Yeah,
so, very typically, kids diagnosed with autism have really big hyperactivity problems. It's hard for them to slow down and sit and stay in one place, and very often they'll have behavior that's really problematic. And one of the issues when the brain is not developing normally, the brain is in charge of everything we do, including the way we're able to behave and comport ourselves. And so very often behavior changes. And so there are certain activities that we know are really powerful for helping behavior. So for example, addressing the child's diet, we know is very, very important. We know that doing the right kinds of physical activity, is very important. And we reference some scientific studies in the book that talks about, because they've done research in schools, for example, that show that kids that engage in aerobic activity, that their focus and concentration and ability to learn improves.
Right.
And there's been many studies that validate that.
Yeah.
And so, looking at the child's diet, looking at their physical activity, giving them the right kinds of sensory stimulation. Many of these children are dealing with something called sensory overload, where they hear everything we hear, but just much louder, right? And it really affects them. They hear the car driving by, it sounds 10 times louder to them than it does to us, and for them it can be debilitating.
Right.
And so when we do the right kinds of sensory stimulation, we can decrease that, and it allows them to settle down and focus.
And sometimes they can hear things that you and I can't hear. Oh, my child's behavior, he'll scream, for no reason at all. Well, there's always a reason.
Right.
And what happened is the condenser in the air conditioning unit turned on. You and I can't hear that. The kid can hear it, and it actually hurts his ears. And we've had kids called autistic who, the sound of the lights, fluorescent lights make that noise, and it's very, very upsetting for them. So we give them an auditory program so that those sounds are no longer, they're not sensitive to them, and they hear like you and I do. And then the behavior goes away.
Yeah. I mean, this is amazing. I mean, and think about hyperactivity. I mean, and the way that we're treating all these things, when we're trying to treat the symptoms and put a Band-Aid on the problem, I mean, it's just not helping. It's not helping the kid. It's not helping anyone.
Yeah, and
but it's easiest.
The drug therapy, a person with a brain injury will sometimes respond the opposite of you and I and average people in terms of that drug. So a child is hyperactive and he's given a downer to slow him down, but no, he becomes more hyperactive. Yeah. Or a kid is, considered, too slow, and so he's given an upper, and that just makes him slower.
Yeah, and very often parents will even say to us, they'll say, we were given this medication for his hyperactivity, but now he's exhausted all the time. He's not as bright and awake as he used to be. And they'll sometimes even say, I would rather go back to when he was hyperactive because at least he was there. He was there.
Right.
But now, he's got this glaze over his eyes all the time.
Yeah.
So it's not fixing the root cause of the problem.
And when we talk about drug therapy, of which we have 60 years of experience with thousands of children, we don't ever touch the drugs without first getting the neurological program going. It's part of our protocol, at least 3 months of solid physical, cognitive, physiological program going, and also our respiratory program, our breathing enhancement program, which helps to get more oxygen to the brain and helps children to breathe better. Those two things have to happen for at least 3 months before our medical staff, designs a program to slowly wean the child off of the medication.
Yeah, and
but it's always done under the
So in
direct
other words,
supervision.
parents don't just pull your kids off.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It has to be done under the direct supervision of a medical doctor who's trained to do this.
Right. So that's just amazing. So an autistic parent of an autistic child, if they're having behavior problems, they're having speech problems, they're having freaking out because of sound, all that's whatever it is, you guys can design a program that treats the root cause at the brain level that ends up changing their symptoms.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've put in the book, examples of children, so parents, because I think parents, it's easy to talk about these things in very general terms, but I think when parents read the book and they hear us talk about a specific kid, they'll be able to relate. They'll say, "Oh, my kid is like that child,"
Right.
and they'll have a better understanding of how these things can help their kid.
Yeah. And I mean, and I just even think about well children in terms of nutrition, and especially I've done some work in really poor areas and seen the nutrition because of the poverty, and it's no wonder that there's behavioral problems and difficulty in school and all that, because just what they're putting in their system alone. I mean, without a brain injury, so that this has such huge implications, So the book again is Answering Autism. Douglas and Spencer Doman, the Doman Method Plan for Autism, ADD, and Neurodevelopmental Delays. Highly encourage you to check it out. Doman, Doman International.org is where you can find them. So if you have a child, frankly, a child of any kind, because children can be greatly helped by the Doman method and kind of their whole wealth of resources. But especially if you or someone has a child that's been diagnosed with some kind of brain injury, developmental delay, autism, ADD, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, there's a long list. Or if you're just worried about your child and the child doesn't seem to be developing on time, or you have a sense about something, it's really worth it to go to domaninternational.org, get this book, get the Doman Method book, contact them, because the work that they do is life-changing for children all over the world. So I highly recommend it to you. Thank you, guys.
Always a pleasure.
It's great to be with you. We'll see you next time.